Hello and welcome, episode 6, and we're back. Spoiler here on another episode of Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. We've got a busy episode today to get through. We're going to be reviewing the enormous amount of wrestling we've been witnessing over the last 2 to 3 weeks, so plenty to get through. We're going to be running through all the happenings in WWE and outside beyond the ring in other promotions as well. So let's get to it. Co-host today, shooting from the hip, definitely not getting himself caught up in any mimosa mayhem. The spot monkey, Andeve.
Thanks very much. Yeah, mimosa mayhem. Didn't Jericho end up in a bath of that? There's a spoiler there for you. Let's avoid that pay-per-view, which was looking terrible on the card, and according to the reviews, I'm not going to bother to watch it. It was also quite poor. We're all like WWE, aren't we?
We've wrapped it up already, pretty much. Anyway,
that's it. Done. All about WWE, which I think at the moment is a bit of an interesting paradox. From SummerSlam to now, there's been some really quite good stuff actually, but alongside that, there's also been that continued poor content that they keep chucking out. I mean, Smackdown is a really, really watchable show, and parts of Raw are actually quite good. Not Raw Underground, but parts of Raw are quite good. But at the same time, it's almost drowning in dross because there's just so much of it. The 2 pay-per-views we've seen, SummerSlam and Payback, they're quite good. But I also had a lot of ambivalence towards them. You know, I was watching them thinking, yeah, this is all right. This is quite a respectable pay-per-view, and it's quite enjoyable. But I don't know, I care that much for these matches. So an interesting time in WWE. Maybe shoots a recovery, or maybe it's going to go back lurching towards that ditch that it was in for the previous 6 months.
And that's an interesting theme, isn't it, about caring about matches and storylines when there's so much content being thrown at you. But I guess we'll get to that as we break down each section and each storyline, as we intend to do today. Just before we begin, wrestlingrebooked@gmail.com. On the social media, we're on Twitter, YouTube, and now Instagram. So for some extra analysis, views, and content, head over to any of those 3 platforms. Right. Section 1. Let's kick off with the Hurt Business.
You're a fan of the Hurt Business, aren't you?
Yeah. I think they've been booked well, and they are money. So let's just recap, shall we? So at SummerSlam, we had Apollo Crews against MVP. SummerSlam, which was, of course, on the 24th of August, if you can remember that far back. So Crews wins, which then set up Crews against Lashley at Payback the following week, which Lashley then won the United States title and currently holds that title at the time of recording. So let's kick off with the SummerSlam match. Right person won?
SummerSlam was Crews MVP, if I remembered that rightly, and that was, I think it was actually on the pre-show, which we talked about in the episode, the pre-booked episode, that why is MVP fighting Crews anyway? You've got the mouthpiece rather than the actual wrestlers or the leading wrestlers in the faction, and it deserved to be on the pre-show because I don't think anyone was really interested in watching another Crews MVP match, and their back and forth have been going on for quite a while. I haven't actually watched that match back since I first saw it. I mean, it's instantly forgettable, but it did lead to obviously the more appealing fight of Crews Lashley at Payback, which is probably where we should have been all along. But you know, at least we got there in the end.
There's a long and winding road to get there.
Yeah. I'm obviously the belt's now on Lashley, as you said, which I think is the right decision. I'm not actually a fan of his this full Lashley finisher he's now been given, but I mean the belt had to go on him. I thought, given that it was the end of his reign, Crews looked really good. He hit his moonsault, which is fantastic. You know, for a guy of his size, hitting his moonsault, a nice crossbody, spine buster. He pulled out a frog splash, multiple suplexes. So he looked good in that final match as it ended up being. But the title had to go on Lashley. I'm glad that it now is, and hopefully that means he can elevate the title in himself, because the Hurt Business and Lashley throughout his career and the Hurt Business in the last 6 months both keep threatening to explode, turning up on Raw Underground looking really dominant or having some titles alongside Shelton Benjamin. They seem to take 2 steps forward and then 2 steps back. So hopefully with that title now on Lashley and the fact they had that good blow-off match at Payback, hopefully now there's some good there's a good future in the offing for that title and for Lashley.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I think the Payback match was good for what it was, for its spot in the show, for its level in the card. I question as well some of the moves that Lashley has, given his size and his look, and with stuff we know we've seen him do before. I mean, even in like his match that he had at the top of the card when he's fighting for the title, like which is interesting. But maybe we'll get to see that as he's progresses on with his title reign. What did you think of the gimmick photography at the end of the match at Payback?
What with the boys in the ring doing their posing?
Yeah.
Well, it worked for Hogan's, so maybe it will work for them. I don't know if it was just designed to give Cruz that little, because didn't he run in and throw a punch and then run off again? I don't know if it was designed for that. Look, I think the Hurt Business are very close to being over. So, if they're going to go with that and it fits MVP's VIP lounge and all that sort of stuff, then, fine. But it sort of doesn't quite balance with that. And then them turning up on Raw Underground and smashing people around. They're sort of betwixt and between. I suppose my question back is less about the Hurt Business, but what about Cruz? Because he was apparently a Heyman guy getting elevated, having been on the roster for a long time. Where do you see him going now? Where can he go now?
He's actually been in the company a long time, hasn't he? He's got a great look, and he could certainly move well for his size. So much so that just looking back over my notes for the Payback match, the amount of flips and somersaults he was doing off the apron and things almost like devalued him a little bit, like rather than just like actually wrestling. But to come back to your question, there's only one place he can go, isn't there? And that's actually onto the other side of the fence, as it were. Yeah,
I reckon so. I think not rebooking as such, because we got to where we want to, but pre-booking or forward thinking, have him join the Hurt Business. He's been back and forth with them for ages. He hasn't been able to beat them. A bit like when Brian joined the Wyatt family all those years ago, I think 2015. Actually, he wasn't able to beat them, so he joined them. Well, what if Cruz, I can't get past the Hurt Business, so actually I'll join them, and it would make sense from a storyline point of view. He would fit in with the look and the style, and actually that would improve the position of Cruz, the Hurt Business, the storylines they could develop. I think, what if he was to go after tag titles with Shelton Benjamin? That'd be a really athletic team, a veteran and someone a little bit newer. It would also improve, and I think we're going to come on to talk about the Raw tag titles next, maybe. It would certainly improve the depth of the roster there. So actually, I think you're right. Him joining the Hurt Business would be a fantastic move for him.
What a squad that would be as well.
and the athleticism and the size of the fantastic. But I think the issue that WWE has, and this is sort of what I referred to at the beginning in the paradox, is they're in a sort of middling position here, in that is at the end of the feud now and Cruz goes back to obscurity and the Hurt Business just sort of meander around, or does Cruz join them, they get more momentum and they continue to build? And it really depends on what WWE does next, whether that's successful or not.
It's going to be interesting to see, isn't it? Who do they actually pitch him up against? Because in that, and we'll come on to talk about Smackdown shortly, but on Raw, that area of the talent roster is a little bit limited for baby faces.
Yeah, certainly.
Right, let's keep things moving along, shall we? Raw Tag Team titles at SummerSlam. The Street Profits beat Andrade and Angel Garza in 7 minutes and 50 seconds to defend the Raw Tag Team titles. You're quite high on Montez Ford, right?
Yeah. I think the trouble with the match, thinking back to SummerSlam, is that there doesn't feel. It obviously sounds a quick match at 7 minutes. Doesn't feel a lot to say about it, which is part of the problem. The match itself was adequate, but I mean, I think Ford looks like he could be a breakout star. I mean, he started the match in a hugely athletic way for those first, I suppose, it's only 3 or 4 minutes, but then eventually hits Dawkins, who I think is underrated as well, actually. Everyone's talking about Ford, but Dawkins also has a lot to offer, who made the hot tag and he bounced into the match. and it ended with Ford's reverse frog splash, which I just find absolutely amazing to watch. The height he gets on that, and that turn, and obviously I know he's doing the turn as soon as he's on the buckle, but that turn almost looks like he does it in midair. I just think it's a really watchable move.
Let's break that down a second. So what is it about that move? Like you're talking about the actual flip in the air.
Yeah, the sort of reverse frog splash he does. Yeah. Obviously, he's put himself into momentum before as he's jumping off, but it just looks fantastic. He gets such elevation in the way he turns around. I just love watching that move.
You ever watch him land it though?
What you mean actually when he's on top of the getting the 1, 2, 3? Yeah. I think, and it's good. He also gets some distance on it, doesn't he?
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I think the only thing I have noticed were two things actually. One is he quite often almost goes past his opponent, jumps over them, right. And two is that he just rebounds straight off them.
Yeah.
So I guess the actual sort of legitimacy of it kind of is devalued somewhat in that instance. In the air, I agree with you; it looks amazing, but like he needs to work on his landing.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah. I'm too busy, probably still dreaming about what he looks like when he's in the air. I think the match itself wasn't that good. And I think probably the issue with it is that everything around those tag team titles, and they've had those titles a fair few months now, has just been totally devalued or lowered in terms of expectations. So it's hard to, and that's the same for the opponents as well. Garza and Andrade are an excellent pair of wrestlers individually, but also together. They've got a decent look and style, and the matches Andrade was pulling out in NXT, Gargano, and even I think when he came on the main roster with, I think it was Mysterio, they're both quality, but the whole tag team division just seems to be a bit of a joke at the moment, and there's a lot of fooling around. Obviously, we've talked about with the Street Profits, with the nonsense with the Viking Raiders or Viking Experience or War Machine, whatever they're called this week, but also, Andrade and Garza, I think that's why it's hard to invest in that match, and probably why it went 7 minutes, because they're just treated a bit like fools. I mean, it ended with that with Vega being involved, which wasn't really necessary. And they've got those backstage love angles with apparently the lady that's involved is some reality TV star. I don't know who that is. But they also had that poisoning, which we thought, well, I had pegged down as retribution. It turned out it was her, but it wasn't her. But now that's just forgotten. And then obviously she cost them the match. So it just continues with the tag team. It doesn't protect anyone. It just makes everything look a bit dumb and undervalued and low expectations. So while I'm high on Ford, I didn't think the match was that good. Decent enough, but for a tag team match at SummerSlam, you'd expect a lot more.
I guess it loops back to your point at the start about things being rushed and things being just generally quite convoluted, because it's hard to invest storyline-wise in watching all these matches when there's no real narrative to it and you don't really know where it's going. Like I agree. I think Andrade and Garza as well. Garza's been a bit of a breakout star, isn't he, over there, like in the COVID period?
Yeah, the new Eddie potentially.
Well, pushing it. And Selena as well, I think is fantastic, and I'm talking like in ring and as a manager. But actually, when you reflect on all of these matches, as we were doing like the research for this episode, like my God, they've had all these different matches, but like none of them are memorable.
No, and actually, as you're saying there, I just remembered at one point looked like they were going to be associated with Orton, didn't they? They bounced, and they were talking about Legacy 2.0 or 3.0 or something anyway, and Charlotte Flair will come back and she'll be involved, and actually that's just disappeared. And you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about that till you were just saying it. So that you're absolutely right on the narrative. You can't really remember who's had the titles, who they fought, and you don't know why they're fighting.
Yeah, shame. Dawkins, you like him?
Yeah, everyone talks about Ford. I mean, you said there in the intro, I'm quite high on Ford, and I am. I mean, he's the one that looks like he's stand out. But Dawkins, when he hit the hot tag and he bounced into the ring, he looked pretty good, and I think they work well as a tag team. I'd just like to see them wrestle a bit more. They're in so many backstage skits, and they were again on Raw. Just let them wrestle.
Let's move things along, shall we? IC mid-card title, which is on Smackdown at the moment.
Yeah.
Most recent episode of Smackdown, that's the 4th of September. At the time of recording, we had Zayn in the ring with his version of the IC title. Mixed in with AJ Styles, who's now back. Again, maybe we'll come on to talk about him a bit later. And the actual IC title holder. So, all a bit much, isn't it?
It isn't. It isn't. And again, this is another one that we're talking about where it's threatening to be excellent, but it looks like WWE wants to do their best to sort of drag this down and make it convoluted and bring it back to the mire. You've got Zayn and Hardy as the double IC champions. Zayn looks like he hasn't had a haircut or a beard trim since he's been away. But he's come back and he's instant energy. And that's obviously we've seen that sort of story before about two champions, but actually it's legitimate with Zayn and Hardy. Zayn's been at home. Hardy's now the champion. You've got Styles still knocking around. Braun and Gulak are somewhere. They were prominent a couple of weeks back. Now they've just sort of disappeared. But also put into that mix, Chad Gable. I'm not going to refer to him by the stupid gimmick they've given him. Corbin, Sheamus, Riddle, Big E. That's 10 people you got there in and around that upper mid cards feuding around that Intercontinental title or close to it. And there's some crossover storylines they're trying to do and some great workers there. So really that should be an absolutely fantastic electric program, but it's a bit convoluted and it isn't quite working. It isn't quite there.
So how do we do what we do best here and rebook all this? Because I agree there's a stack of talent here. Riddle's just come up from the main card. Big E, who has been kind of thrusted into his position with the injuries to his tag team members. Mm-hmm. Sheamus is not that long back from injury either.
He's also wearing the same clothes every single episode. I don't know if he's just recorded them 6 hours straight in the performance center or if he's got a decent dry clean that he keeps going back to.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you've got Corbin as well, who for a good couple of years now has been kind of threatening to break the main title card scene.
Yeah.
But it hasn't really done it. He's had a couple of matches, hasn't he?
He had the Money in the Bank, I think, but didn't cash in.
He did. But there he is sort of stumbling around in the mid-card having with just the most ridiculous gimmick.
Yeah, the Corbin's King thing.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah.
Just because you win a tournament doesn't mean you have to make it your gimmick. It doesn't add any value.
I think
it's totally ridiculous.
You're absolutely right. And it's also been done so many times. You're absolutely right. I don't understand why the winner of the King of the Ring, they always have to become the king. And then it just doesn't make any sense. And the winner of Money Bank doesn't become a banker, do they? And of course, that's a bit stupid, but that's the equivalent of I've won Money in the Bank. So now I'm really rich and I can pay people to do things. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't make any sense. And
so Owen Hart did it in 1994 and became the King of Hearts. And that made sense. And that then elevated him. And then that kicked off his rivalry with Brett. Mm-hmm. And it just seems that since then...
Everyone since.
Yeah.
Apart from Austin, maybe, who then was really breakout because he didn't follow that. King Booker was okay, but it's just the same stuff over again. And it's just adding to the complicated nature of the sort of... Is Gable a heel or a face? Is he working for Corbin? Is he not working for Corbin? It just doesn't quite make sense. And what we ended up with was... with all this mid-card stuff, no Intercontinental title match at Payback. And we ended up with Big E and Sheamus working together and then Corbin and Riddle. And I've got to say that I didn't really enjoy, considering the quality of the talent and how we're talking about, there's a lot of people in and around that scene. I didn't really enjoy either of those matches.
Which ones?
Big E, Sheamus and Corbin Riddle. I thought Big E, Sheamus, like you said, Big E is a star in the making. He's a star already, but we're waiting for him to hit the main event. He's been given this opportunity now, and it's the right match for him to fight Sheamus, but I just found that match slow and boring.
It's interesting because those two matches went back-to-back at Payback.
Yeah.
Big E defeating Sheamus in 12 minutes 20, followed by Riddle defeating Corbin in 10 minutes 55. So there you had like nearly 25 minutes worth of content on that pay-per-view in two singles matches, which in itself is a bit of an achievement. There's no gimmicks there either, no gimmick matches.
No, apart from the people in the ring with high over on their high on their gimmicks, like Corbin with King and Matt Riddle with his bro stuff.
Yeah. Unless you're calling the Thunderdome a gimmick as well, which
I suppose
we'll come on to. But just to kind of, because there's a lot of variables, moving parts here in this, isn't there? But I guess if we can just try and summarize and rebook where we're going to get to with this, because there is just so much going on, isn't there? For me, I think the real loser here is the Intercontinental title itself. It's been slowly just devalued with multiple titles, quick changes. We had the quick change to Jeff Hardy after Styles had it for a short period. And so for me, that's the real loser. They can build the program around a solid champion. If Jeff Hardy is that guy that's going to be around, he's going to do TV every week, then fine. He's still got, he can still move in the ring. He's still got enough moves. So he has a decent angle as well that they've hammered to death over the last couple of months. So if they can build a program around him, then I'd have no problem with that. And then you could look at moving some of the other guys over to the tag team scene, which is a little limited because Cesaro and Nakamura are fighting the Lucha House Party. So I mean,
no one to fight.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of an imbalance there. So there you go.
Yeah, so I suppose you're talking there about just making things a bit more straightforward. So Big E, Sheamus, that makes sense for them to have a match. That makes Sheamus as a sort of a gatekeeper for Big E to go through. But you don't need Sheamus, in my mind anyway, putting on 4 different leg submissions for Big E to fight through. Just have that as a short, quick, hard-hitting match. Same with Riddle and Corbin. Just streamline it. Just simplify it. I understand that Riddle is the bro, but everything he does doesn't need to be about a bro mission or a bro to sleep or have it, sewn on his kit. Just make it nice and simple, get them in, have some decent fights. Riddle and Corbin looked all right, apart from that bro to sleep, which just Riddle can't really pull off. And so, yeah, you're right. Again, the WWE is sort of on the cusp of something good, but they can't quite get it right. Just make it simple, simplify it, and it'd probably be much better. Agree.
Keep it moving, shall we?
Yep.
Women's mid-card, which we broadly have split here into the issues around Sonya and Mandy, which is more about what's going on outside the ring than their match in it.
Sure.
At SummerSlam. And then the women's tags. So let's kick off with Sonya, who appears to be taking a leave of absence from WWE after her trials and tribulations with her kidnapper in real life. So
tempted, yeah.
Led to believe. And then she had a match with Mandy at SummerSlam, which, if we were to believe reports, they changed the ending there so that Mandy won. It was 10 minutes and 5 seconds, no DQ match, which actually I thought was all right for what it was. There's a decent backstory. They came to the ring with a decent intensity. It was like their blow-off match. It just didn't need the gimmick. Mandy couldn't even turn the table over.
No, yeah. This is another storyline that's been lingering on for ages, because originally Ziggler was involved, wasn't he? And they had a match at WrestleMania, and it's still going on. I just thought it was all a bit off. Like you say, it was most notable for Mandy having a fight with the table and trying to get that work. There wasn't really anything. The best bit for me, given the gimmick, was when Deville was throwing chairs off the table at Mandy, which I thought was quite good and quite innovative, and hadn't seen that as regularly. But the rest of it, I thought the match was poor. I mean, the closing sequence was all right with Mandy for the knees and then a finisher, but maybe segging slightly away here, but I don't know what Otis was doing at the end, and he just came out. It was cringeworthy to watch, and he was on Smackdown again this week, and he was cringeworthy to watch. So I didn't really enjoy that match. I know Otis isn't on the mid card, but women's mid card anyway. But he should be on the lower mid card and just out. He's just cringeworthy to watch. He's a hard person to watch, hard to get behind, and he essentially came out and then dominated the end of that segment.
Yeah, we've talked about Otis quite a bit, haven't we, on previous episodes? WrestlingRebooked.podbean.com for previous episodes there. And it's always going to be a disaster waiting to happen.
I think you actually, if we go back to the Money in the Bank one, I think you actually said that was a terrible decision. And I said, we'll see how it goes. It could work. And now I'm left eating Otis's sandwich.
Unlike Morrison.
Yeah.
The mistake that WWE made with that Sonya Mandy match is have them go on after. Okay, it wasn't immediately after, so Yeah, the third match on the card was Sonya and Mandy having gone after Bayley and Asuka.
Yeah.
And like when you're just comparing those two, like it looked so silly and so limited. Mandy, very limited moves. I can't remember the last time we even saw them have a match, either of them, on TV. So they weren't done any favors there. But nevertheless, Sonya's gone for a bit now. Will she come back? Will she leave town?
Yeah, I don't know. And that's that women's mid card. And also you could probably throw in, and I know we're going to come on to talk about the women's in just a moment as a collective, given the story, but you've also had the iconic split up on Raw. So I don't know if that works as trying to make, are they trying to now get two individuals to wrestle so that they can have, as individuals, so they can have a better mid card there? But actually the Iconics would seem to be a useful tag team to have around, given the nature of the tag division and where that's going. But instead they split up and the Riot Squad are back together, but no one cares about the Riot Squad. So, the mid card of the women's is really struggling. But on the reverse of that, or conversely, everything there is invested at the top of the card, the top of the women's card, which is actually fantastic.
Yeah. So what you're talking about there is the recent episode of Raw, 31st of August, where they had a loser is no more match. Which Liv and Ruby Riott won. And then the plan is apparently to, obviously have them on individual pushes. From what we've seen with the Raw Underground, Peyton's going to be the heel, which fits. She's the better in ring of the two anyway. And then you have Billy going it maybe as a manager or as a mouthpiece. They haven't.
I mean, it's silly, really, because they haven't really fulfilled their destiny as a collective. I know they won the first titles, but then it just sort of disappeared. Eventually, it's gone to Banks and Bayley. So, especially now the tag titles, which we're about to talk about with who they're on, you need some challengers. Once the Riot Squad have been gone through, where do you go? So I think the women's mid card is really struggling at the moment.
I suppose WWE would tell you they had their WrestleMania moment, though. So, they've achieved everything they need to achieve.
Yeah, fair enough. Maybe. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, who are we to question?
So right. The main event scene?
I'm sorry?
Women's main event scene?
Yeah, absolutely. So, here we go. Let's see if we can condense everything that's happened over the last few weeks into a few sentences. So, we had, at least on the Raw side, Asuka versus Banks at SummerSlam. And my God, what match that was. That was 11 minutes and 25 seconds, which Asuka defeated Sasha for the title. They then had a rematch on Raw the following night. So that's on the 25th of August episode of Raw, which Asuka defended and won. And she hasn't defended that title since, at least to the point of recording anyway. And then we've got Bayley, who defeated Asuka on the same SummerSlam card in 11 minutes and 35 seconds, and hasn't defended that title since. And we should also make mention of the tag titles, which was Banks and Bayley at Payback. And they, of course, were beaten by Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax in 10 minutes and 20 seconds. They then defended them titles on the recent episode of Smackdown, the 4th of September, which Baszler and Jax won again. And that's when Bayley turned on Banks and storyline beat up her knee and injured her neck. Banks now written off TV for the foreseeable.
It's done well there. So I've watched a lot of that in the last few days because I was away. So just to check out, we've got Bayley as the SmackDown champion, Asuka with the Raw Women's title, which she won at SummerSlam. The tag titles on Baszler and Jax, who won them at Payback. And then you got Banks no longer on TV because Bayley's turned on her. So is that right? That's where we're at?
You got it.
Right, okay. Starting with the matches at SummerSlam, with the Asuka sort of double, as it were.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think they made the right decision. The commentary team, at the start of that, and Asuka Bayley went first, they were really, really bigging up Asuka's achievements and talking about how successful she had and everything she'd done, which Bayley has done as well, but they were clearly making Asuka seem as a viable threat. And she actually had all the early offense until Bayley hit a counter outside the ring. I think Bayley did need to win that. Of Bayley and Banks, Bayley's work has been the better of the two, and they've both been excellent, but Bayley clearly excelling just that little bit more. I didn't enjoy the quick roll up at the end. I didn't think it flowed well into it. It almost felt like it was too staccato, but Bayley has that title on lock. Performances have really earned the fact that she should have that title and hold on to that title. And of course, it wasn't just about that match itself, which, as you've alluded to, was really good, but it also set up the later match between Asuka and Banks. So I think it worked well as an individual match, apart from the finish, which could have been better, but it also set up nicely that second of the doubleheader.
I like the match. It's a good opener for the big show, second biggest show of the year, isn't it?
Yep. And the biggest show of the summer.
Hottest show of the summer, wasn't it? And I'm with you on the finish. It's interesting you bring that up. I think it's quite noticeable in a lot of matches, and I don't know if that's a product of the performance center and the almost like conveyor belt style of wrestling that we now see versus like the mesh of styles that we maybe see in bygone eras. And like, it's sometimes quite obvious when the finish is done because the guys are trying so hard to be in the right position and execute in the right way. And there's almost that kind of pause in match sometimes that you see. So, oh, here comes the finisher. And, they kind of ramp things up a little bit, which you want, right? That's, matches are built around the finish. Some people would tell us. And it just looks a little bit contrived.
It's very telegraphed as you're watching it. Obviously, we watch a lot of wrestling, but you can see, and actually thinking back to our last episode, Mr. Coops was on talking about the end of the Piper Hart. Actually, that you didn't see coming and wasn't something you felt like you'd seen before. Whereas I totally agree with you, and I don't know the reasons why, but you can just see it. You can feel it coming, and you can see it coming. And obviously, what you really want is not to be able to see that at all, which was the tagline: "Never see it coming," except you could.
Maybe we're just watching too much wrestling here. But no, for the program as a whole, I mean, the most important point that I think is worth making here is that through all these matches that we've just talked about, right up until the latest episode of Smackdown, I personally have been invested in the storyline the whole time through. Edge of the seat stuff, well written. I mean, we're quick to slam everything that's going on here, but let's make the point. This has been well done, well paced as a storyline. It's been interesting to watch. Some of the facials and the dynamic between the two have been excellent. The way they sort of look at each other, play off at each other, keep you guessing. Call me naive, but for one, I didn't see that beatdown coming after that tag match. And when it did, I was like,
well, not even when it came back after commercial break and they were still in the ring.
Well, maybe at that point, but I just didn't think they'd pull the trigger on a TV taping. I thought they would wait for something a bit bigger. Plus, if they weren't going to do it at SummerSlam, I figure they might try and roll this round to WrestleMania, which they may do anyway. But nevertheless, kudos to the creative for this. Yeah,
and I suppose if Banks is off TV, it depends how long she's off for. But you're absolutely right in terms of the big story, because the second match of that night, Asuka and Banks, it was a lot more even to start with, to almost lure you into thinking, well, okay, whereas Asuka looked like she was on top of Bayley. Actually, here it's 50-50 with Banks. But then Asuka dropped her top rope DDT, and there's a drop kick, and then, had the momentum and built to the win. And I think you're absolutely right in that storyline. Obviously, we're looking at the benefit of hindsight, but they had to have Asuka win. If she lost both those matches, then actually Bayley and Banks would have been champions for another 6 months or something. There was no legitimate, especially with Lince and Charlotte not around, no legitimate people to challenge them. So they've pulled the trigger there with Asuka at exactly the right time. And then, of course, they've lost the tag titles to Baszler and Jax, which, apart from the match itself, which was at times hard to watch, especially when Jax was throwing Banks into the barricade, thought she was going to take her head off. That actually works as well, because Baszler needs to be in and around that main event, or needs to be in and around the sort of title scene. She absolutely looks fantastic when she hit the ring. The finish worked as well, with the fact she used Sasha Banks as a weapon to get Bayley, which meant descent between the two of them, but also made Baszler look really, really strong. So
It's clever booking, isn't it?
Yeah, and with her MMA background, she just looks excellent, almost poetic as she goes about. So that finish was great and elevated her and fed into the Bayley Banks storyline, which obviously, as you said, ended in Smackdown with Bayley turning on Banks. The whole thing has been executed brilliantly. It was just starting to feel a little bit like, the Golden Role Models are on 3 times a show. They're doing a promo, they're doing an in-ring segment, then they're doing a commentary, and then they're wrestling. It just felt a little bit like, I'm getting a bit fatigued with them. So pulling it now and the way they pulled it, I think it's set them up really well for the next few months.
But fair play to the two of them. They never looked or appeared fatigued. They went out and gave decent matches, 3 times a week in some cases.
Yeah.
So fair play to them doing it. We've spoken about Bayley before. I certainly have, about how I think she's fantastic. I agree. She needs to be in that main event scene. And if we are rebooking here, not that there's too much to rebook, as we've just picked up everything they've done, but you could have had, if you were going to have Asuka lose both matches at SummerSlam, you could have then introduced Bayley to the main event scene at Payback and got a different way. I personally wouldn't have Jax in a ring at all. She's just awkward and just don't enjoy. And she can't really do much anyway. And that would have been a different route to go. And then you could have had the Iconics fight for the tag titles.
Yeah, which would make sense. Yeah, exactly. But actually, I think what we're saying in terms of Wrestling Rebooked, we're talking about most of these things being almost at a halfway house at the moment, and WWE could turn left and it could be really, really good, or it could turn right and they could go back to some of the awful stuff we've seen up to and since WrestleMania. But in the women's stuff, we're pretty high on that. It's pretty good.
Yeah, and I think it's good to end on in the section on a high note, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that'll do.
Be positive.
Not COVID positive though.
Well, all in good time. All right, section 2 coming up. Section 2, episode 6, Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. Right, and we're going to break away just from our review of the wrestling over the last few weeks, just to chat on a few hot topics, our finger on the pulse, shall we say, of what's going on. And arguably the biggest change or the biggest thing that's been introduced in this COVID era over the last few weeks is the Thunderdome. Do you like it?
I prefer it to what was happening. I like it. I still think wrestling, just like all sports really, maybe all life, is desperate for a live crowd. We just talked about the women's there, not to harp on too much, but imagine that in front of a crowd. Or as we come to later, the big dog is back. Imagine that with a crowd. So I still think that's really, really missing, and it's not a patch on that. Is it better than the Performance Centre, which was behind that perspex glass, tired, small budget, looked low key? No, I definitely think it is. Again, it's a spot monkey speaking, but I actually enjoy the pyro and the fireworks they've got going off. Looks really good. Makes it look like a big event. And I don't know what it looks like to the performers, but I suppose it's better with having some of those images around the ring, but it's I find it a bit awkward to watch still.
Yeah, I'm split. The set looks amazing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When they come out and certainly at SummerSlam, and they went, we added a bit more budget for some of the pyro and some of the lighting, etc. Looked fantastic as they came out, and it's also a little bit refreshing as well to move away from that dark kind of scene.
Yeah, that tiny entrance ramp.
Yeah, but the actual images of all those people sat there in the audience, it's just a bit much, and you can't actually interact with anyone. So
it looks like a computer game a little bit.
Yeah. I think for the talent, I'm sure if you ask them, they prefer actually having people there, and even if it is their colleagues in developmental, and they still have that in NXT, of course. Yeah.
I think as well, they've had some trouble with the Thunderdome, with some of the people that have turned up on the screen. So I think I saw a picture of Kenny Omega. There was Chris Benoit. There was
The KKK.
some less tasteful ones in terms of people turning up as the KKK, which I think WWE has clamped down on, and I'm surprised they allow that to slide in the first place. But I suppose it's semi-chuckle for those people watching. Which question? Do I like the Thunderdome? I think you said split. I think I'd agree. Is it an improvement? Yes. I'm surprised it took them so long to get there. But I think we're still desperate for live fans, and surely the performers must be. Surely think about Drew McIntyre hitting that Claymore, must be desperate for live.
Yeah, for
live
sure.
Fans.
All right, let's keep it moving along, shall we? There's been a couple of leavers in WWE over the last few weeks, some of which are not in-ring performers. Mauro Ranello and Rene Young. Any thoughts?
I'm surprised Rene Young has been allowed. Well, in fact, both of them have been allowed to let go because they're both actually standouts in what they do in terms of interviewing or commentary. They're both a cut above what's already there, which maybe is why they've left, because they think they can excel somewhere else. I did read that actually Moxley / Ambrose was thinking about coming back, or was more open to coming back, because what he hated was all the house shows, although I think he also hated his creative direction. And now there aren't all those house shows. He'd be tempted to go back to WWE, but that seems less likely now that Renee is not there. She released a cookbook or something as well, so maybe she's just branching out away from WWE and their confines. And Ranello, I mean, he's probably, well, maybe Samoa Joe would have something to say, but he's probably the best commentator, isn't he? And maybe he's got the best stuff to commentate on. But that's a real shame. He was a real cornerstone.
Yeah,
he was a real cornerstone of what was going on.
Yeah, would agree.
Why did they leave? Is there any clarity on it?
Depends what you want to read. So I think the official line, which sounds very WWE on Rene Young, was to do with the backstage shows which they ditched, which she was very much central to. Of course, she had COVID. Was diagnosed with COVID too, which she came out and was quite open about, which they didn't like.
Right. Moxley turned up on one of her shows as well, didn't he? Which they also didn't like in the background.
Yes, that's right. And social media, obviously, they did stuff together during the pandemic. Then,
imagine that, a husband and wife doing stuff together. How dare they? How dare they?
But then Britt Baker turned up on NXT before the pandemic to see an Adam Cole match. So it's like,
maybe it works one way, but they won't allow it the other.
Yeah. Where'd you draw the line?
Imagine Cole turning up at AEW.
That sums up AEW sort of there, doesn't it? But anyway, listen to this Rene Young quote. She was asked about COVID. When they asked her why she was open about it, she was like, "Yeah, I generally like to be transparent about everything. I like to be honest. There's no shame in having got COVID. We don't know what's going on with anything. We're all trying to figure it out. So when I tweeted that I had it, I wasn't doing it as like I got COVID. That was not my MO when I tweeted it. I was mostly, hey, I have it. Also, in the case where there's people that could have been around me and maybe seen that I'd had it, I felt responsibility to make sure people knew that I was sick, but it was not well received." And then one last bit, she goes on to say that WWE said, you shouldn't have posted it. But I was like, we wish you gave us a heads up. It was bad for PR. I'm paraphrasing slightly there, but that sort of sums up WWE's kind of approach to the whole pandemic, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, so I think it's two-pronged there. I think it sums up WWE's approach to the pandemic, which, goes all the way back to we were talking about when they released all the talent. And the only time it's really been mentioned on air is when Triple H, on his birthday show or whatever, didn't drink some water. But it also leads into sort of breaking news in the last 24, 48 hours of WWE clamping down on superstars' use of, I don't know if it's still called social media, but TikTok and Twitch and things like that, I think.
Well, Paige has come out and said that she's not going to stop using it.
No, she just changed her name to a normal name, her actual name, and said, "What are you going to do?" I think likely with Vince, what he's seen there is that, I think WWE statement said that they own the names or the rights to the names, so they own the characters. So that's why they don't want them as characters broadcasting. I think what it is a way for WWE to set up their own platform just for their stars to make more money off them. And actually this links back to our very first episode where we were really, really critical of them releasing stars during the pandemic, because actually what they do is now. They have these superstars as independent performers, so they don't have to pay them medical bills or give them time off or whatever, because they're independent contractors. But in reality, they're not. Because even though they're independent contractors who should be able to do their own thing, actually WWE is now saying, well, you might be independent contractors, but you're linked into us, so you can't have your own independent stuff outside of us. Just seems a bit like their storylines and their content, a bit of a paradox and a bit contradictory, and it doesn't really sit very well.
Yeah, it's probably a case as well that a lot of the contracts and negotiations in wrestling historically have always been done in an era before social media, and B, in an era before there's a pandemic. Yeah. And you just wonder whether a lot of these wrestlers would have actually even taken to social media as much as they have when they're working, 6 days, 7 days a week scheduled anyway.
Yeah. And also the other thing to add to that is that the person in charge is still a 70-something-year-old man who's been in charge the whole time, who probably doesn't quite understand exactly how this stuff works or is relevant. And of course, we know he's still a megalomaniac in terms of how much control he wants. So that further muddies the water, makes things murky. He's
still obviously concerned that he gets 3 signatures on a contract for that. For his triple threat match. That's his of utmost importance.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if it's seconds before the match, which we'll come on to, I guess.
Maybe a nice time for segue.
Yep.
All right, section 3, Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. Right, final part of the show. And before we delve into the main event scene on both sides of TV, want to make mention of our friends across the pond. Rewind, recap, relive, where legends and rising stars meet. Podcasts which we've become affiliated with. They produce some fantastic content, both on their social media and actually with their audio itself. Recently had interviews with Hornswoggle, Godfather, and coming up, Jake Roberts, one of your favourites, isn't he?
Fantastic. Actually, Godfather as well. Really enjoyed him from the Attitude Era, of course. And Jake the Snake. Yeah, those interviews are really, well, obviously I know the Jake the Snake one, but those interviews are really good. Really mixing present with past.
Rewind, recap, relive. If you search them on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, you will find their content. Highly recommend giving them a check out, and let us know what you think. Right. So
we might as well rebook.
Yeah. Segues nicely onto. Let's get stuck into Rollins and Mysterio, shall we? So just to recap, we kicked off with their eye for an eye match at Extreme Rules way back on the 20th of July, which we've talked about on previous episodes. We then went to the Summerslam match, which was a street fight between Dominic Mysterio and Seth Rollins, which of course Rollins won. And then at Payback on the 30th of August, we had the tag match with Dominic and Ray against Rollins and Murphy. Wow, a lot to digest there. And yet here we are still talking about it. So,
and still talking about it when you've seen Raw as well. It's not over.
So let's kick off with the SummerSlam match, shall we?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. This is another one, I suppose, like Strowman Wyatt, which we will talk about, or the Street Profits, that seems to have been going on for ages. Because, of course, you mentioned the eye for an eye match, but there was obviously at least a month of build up to that. And I have to say, I think you're probably going to you may well disagree with me here with what I'm going to end with. I was not looking forward to their match at SummerSlam. I had no interest in the eye for an eye match. Horror show. I just wasn't looking forward to this. It feels like this has been going on for months and months. I just wasn't interested. Past tense. I wasn't interested in Dominic as a character. I actually thought he was more compelling as an 8-year-old boy at SummerSlam 2005 in the feud between Eddie and Ray. I just wasn't interested in him as this character he is now. Furthermore, Pat McCaffrey debuted I mean, I said debuted, he probably never wrestled again, but he was on NXT the night before as a non-wrestler celebrity, and his performance was absolutely phenomenal. And I certainly can't think of any better debuts. So I was really confident going into SummerSlam that Dominic's match was going to be well, it's not Dominic's match, but Dominic and Rollins was going to be absolutely rubbish and no good at all. And I guess I'm pleased to say I was absolutely wrong. I thought it was an absolutely excellent match.
Oh, no.
And Dominic Mysterio was actually really pretty good. I mean, I hear the oh no. You don't agree?
No, it's rubbish.
I actually disagree completely. I think do you think the match was rubbish, or you think his performance was rubbish, or you think, both?
Okay, let's start with the positives. For his first match for, what is he, 23?
Yeah.
He did pretty well. He sold quite well. He was in the right place for the right spot, which I guess, again, your first match, let's nod your head to that. But for the fact it was a street fight, which is basically meant that you could do what you want when you want and have not any sort of massive creative structure to it. It was just too much. It went on for, tell you exactly how long that match was. Seth Rollins defeats Dominic Mysterio, 22 minutes and 35 seconds. I mean, it was just so long. I zoned out for a lot of it. So maybe it was good.
Well, I suppose it can't be good if part of it is making people
and that's part of our running theme here for today's episode, isn't it? Like the volume of content that we've seen. A lot of the facials and comments that Rollins makes is totally dumbing down his character, because it's also repetitive and it's borderline cringy now. Come on, Dominic, get up, Dominic. This is what you want, Ray. Oh God, it's just so contrived.
Okay, so I guess go on. Sorry.
That's it. Go on.
That's it. I can't take any more. Now, so I'm talking at the start here about WWE, almost the paradox, as in good stuff but don't care. And leading into this, I just didn't care. But I hear what you're saying in terms of, is the match something that people are bought into and could be much better? And I do agree with that. But when we actually got to the match, Mysterio is he countered that buckle bomb that Rollins does into Hurricane Rana, and he had a really nice flowing tornado DDT counter as well. There was some callbacks, and I know the kendo stick stuff from Raw was a bit much on that, but there was some callbacks to that. I didn't like the eye for an eye match, but there was some callbacks to that as well on the steps, and also Ray sort of being at ringside but not being at ringside as well in terms of his involvement. They also did quite a job of making sense of that and why it should be held back. So, look, would I rather have seen Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero from 2005 featuring Dominic, or this match featuring Dominic? Certainly the earlier, but this was I just thought it was pretty good.
I watched that match recently. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's really good.
That's the best Rey Mysterio match I've ever seen.
Really, really good. But I mean, the only actually for me, the downside was that Rollins won again, which, and they had to win. So I wanted Rollins to win. I didn't want him to lose to Dominic. But also the fact that he won meant that the feud has to continue past Payback. And of course, we saw them wrestle on Raw in a sort of qualifier for number one contenders. So I'd like this feud to be over, but the match itself, I wasn't hugely bought into and expected to be rubbish, but I did enjoy it.
Right. So if you actually look at Payback, the tag match, which was Dominic and Ray against Rollins and Murphy, was 16 minutes, added to the 22 minutes we watched at SummerSlam the week before. Suddenly it's 40 minutes. It's almost as long as your Orton Edge match that you slammed.
Yeah, fair enough. Although the Orton Edge match was far slower and more ridiculous, whereas the Payback, I think the Payback match was enjoyable as well. Ray and Rollins had a sort of hot moment to continue their beef. I'm surprised to say it, but I am where I am. I actually cared when Dominic hit the ring. I thought, oh, great. Yeah, come on, Dominic, get in there. And I thought, surely as well, I'm expecting you to agree here, but I thought the end of the match was excellent as well. We got a Mysterio victory, and we had that descent between Murphy and Rollins. So, again, I mean, as a sequence, forget the long term, those last two matches and Dominic's performance in them,
That's the most we've seen
I
out
like
of
him.
Rollins' character since he's been that Monday Night Messiah, when he started to turn on Murphy, and there you could see that dissension coming. Like suddenly, I was hooked back in. That's actually written down in my notes, almost word for word. Like that was the highlight of that match for me, which is, I'm sure, not what Creative wanted, but as a fan sitting watching, but that was.
So how do you rebook that stuff then? Because I've got one little tweak I would make, but I'm pretty face on those matches. How would you rebook them? What would you do?
Guess that makes me heel.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have Dominic in a frontline feud at the top of almost at the top of a card here at any point. Like, fair enough if he wants to come into wrestling business off the back of his father's legacy, then that's great. Like, he's clearly got potential. He clearly understands the business to some degree, and that's fine. I've got no problem with that. Let him go through developmental, go through NXT, let him come up and learn his trade, so to speak. So if you're rebooking, I wouldn't have this happening at all before it kicks off. If you are creative and you are sat there with that license to create these cinematic angles and matches, shall we say, where eye for an eye, eye for an eye match, and follow it on with a kendo stick match, which has been done to death and totally just kind of watered down, then fine. And there's plenty of people just anyone that Rollins can work with that you could put over. Maybe Keith Lee.
So I don't disagree with you. And we're going to talk about, actually, you mentioned Lee there. We're going to talk about the pace at which WWE tries to build things. And I agree with you. It'd be much better if Dominic was somewhere else and Rollins was doing something else. But for me, once we got here, I suppose it, again, links back to what we were saying at the beginning. It was fairly enjoyable. I thought it was quite good. My one tweak would be that I really want Dominic to join Seth. That would make his character compelling. So, you start to see the descent between Murphy and Rollins. If Dominic was to, if we're going to push Dominic, have him turn his back on Ray, have him fight Murphy, who, with Rollins, there's some descent. And I just think that would give him way more of a character, and you would care much more. His in-ring stuff is good, so fair play to him in that sense. But that's where I would take this feud next if it has to continue.
That's interesting. Do you think he's got, you're saying about taking his character, do you think he's got enough character in him?
Well, right. As a human, I don't know. He certainly hasn't got enough character.
No, I mean as a heel.
Yeah, well, he certainly hasn't got enough character as his character is now. He's just this bland. I quite like his ring gear. It looks a lot like Rollins anyway. And he's certainly got a decent enough moveset. So he's just bland at the moment. So if this is going to continue, I don't disagree with you that he shouldn't be in this spot, and I'd rather Rollins was doing something else. But as he is, and the feud seems like it's not over, that's where I would go with it next.
He can't cut a promo. He's so obviously scripted, wasn't it? So maybe that does make sense.
Don't have him cut. Don't have him cut one. Yeah, but anyway, that's we might be talking about this on the next episode as well. So.
I fear so. Time to move on.
Yep.
Right. So that brings us now to the Universal title scene on SmackDown. So let's see if we can recap here just to put ourselves in the picture. So let's go all the way back to Money in the Bank, 10th of May 2020, when we had the Firefly Funhouse match, the first, I believe, between Strowman and Wyatt, which Strowman won for the title. We then had their match at Extreme Rules, the Swamp match. Did you see that match, Andeve?
I didn't see a swamp match. No, I saw something happening in a swamp. Who won that match?
That was who knows, 20th of July for the swamp match. Fast forward to SummerSlam. We then had a actual one-on-one match between Strowman and The Fiend, which The Fiend won and regained the title. And at that point, I guess we're all happy because that's what we wanted, right? We wanted The Fiend to stand there with the title and have a decent run. But wait, here comes Roman Reigns making his return. Where's he been? Anyone know? Appears to be a heel Roman Reigns. Attacks Wyatt after that match. That SummerSlam match, by the way, was just 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Interesting. We'll come on to that in a sec. Which then set up their match at Payback, which has just happened last week, 30th of August. And we had Wyatt versus Reigns versus Strowman.
Indeed.
Reigns has won the title in
Shocker.
quick time. Yeah, well, 12 minutes 46, although Reigns wasn't present for most of that match. We then had Reigns appear on Smackdown for the first time. That's the 4th of September episode of Smackdown where he and Heyman cut a promo to basically say that he's not an advocate anymore. He's more serving as his client.
Special counsel or something.
Special counsel, that's it. Thank you. So that's where we're at with the feud.
Yeah, and
a lot to get through.
It's some of this is a bit repetitive as to where we've been before, but you can even trace that back to further. I know the feud is going on now, but the seeds were sown when they chucked that title on Goldberg and then snuck it off him at WrestleMania. Then you had the Fiend doing that thing with Cena and Reigns, obviously, which they couldn't have predicted because of the pandemic. When I was watching the match at SummerSlam, it felt completely unnecessary. We'd taken so long to get there. Like you say, that original Wyatt match, the Firefly Funhouse version of Wyatt, was months and months ago. Then they had the swamp stuff, and then they had all the bits in between with Strowman shaving his head and disappearing and coming through the speakers. It just felt like an unnecessary match. And there was some decent stuff. I like the action by the barricade, and made use of the announce table and the stairs, and they're hitting strong power bombs. But then they went.
You ever taken a power bomb?
Absolutely not. Or a power bomb. Actually, I've taken a few power bombs. But then they went backstage as well because it was the type of match it was, which just seemed totally unnecessary. They sort of walked backstage, did a little bit in Gorilla, and then walked back to the ring. And the Fiend won, obviously, ending that weak Strowman title reign. If you thought it was unnecessary getting there, it was certainly then shown to be totally unnecessary when Reigns turned up, smashed him with a few chairs, and then won the title back at Payback. So that SummerSlam match was sort of an aberration in a sort of longer continuum, which is actually what Strowman's reign has been, and his feud with Bray Wyatt has been as well.
It's just all too much. All of it has just been from the swamp match to the Firefly Funhouse match to the ring collapsing to changing Strowman's music. I used to quite enjoy Strowman's entrance.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like purist form, just like the loud bang and the drums hitting and everything. Now, all the smoke comes up and there's this noise of a train and
it's because he's the Strowman Express now, isn't it?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean
I know, I've just wound you up.
Yeah. And now you're just like, what else can they do to each other that's going to generate any interest to want to see it?
Fair enough. I disagree with you slightly in that the match at SummerSlam, I mean, you could write that off, but I'd go as far as I really, really enjoyed the opening of Strowman Wyatt at Payback, probably because it felt like it's where the match should have been months ago, and they'd spent ages getting here. I was just watching it going, this is pretty good. I like the bit off the stage. I like the use of the announce table. I didn't even mind the ring imploding. I think that's what they should have been doing months ago, having these two bear moths hit each other as hard as they could. But, and again, this is the WWE, it's at a crossroads. Which way is it going to go? Because, of course, the inevitable is that Reigns has turned up, like you say, with the contract, signing it down the ramp, which is just stupid. And then he won the title. And you say the match was 12 minutes? He must have been in it for about 2.5. Yeah, well, it's a strange one because there's lots to like about what's going on, because everyone has been begging for a Roman Reigns heel turn, and it looks like he has this heel turn. He's got this alliance with Heyman, which really, really works. The promos they've done together since they've been back have been excellent. So you're sort of almost there, but then at the same time, it's a bit off because Strowman's reign has been rubbish, as we've been talking about, and it's been naffily booked all the way through. You've now got The Fiend has had the title twice and lost it twice in just ridiculous, undermining circumstances. And on this Reigns heel turn, Reigns has become back as a heel when there are no fans. So they've been trying to make him face for years, even though he's been booed. But now when they don't need to worry about what fans do, they've turned him heel. And actually looking at the character, it's almost like he's a cool heel. just the way he's there with Heyman, people are probably going to cheer him. So I don't know if they're double, triple, quadruple bluffing us, but it doesn't. It's just still a little bit off and doesn't quite fit.
Agree. I can't help but think that there's some timeline coincidence here with Lesnar leaving or announcing he is no longer with the company. Suddenly Heyman's with Reigns and he's come back. That's what happened within the space of a week.
Yeah. And what's you're absolutely right on that timeline. What's the rush? Why doesn't Reigns come back, slowly build or slowly turn heel? Or
I'll tell you what the rush is. Ratings.
Well, slowly. But the ratings were actually down after Payback. So normally after a pay-per-view, ratings always have a little spike, but actually they were down after Payback, which is almost, and obviously they're down at the starting point is there, but that's almost unheard of. So it's just I think it's just another point where I'm 50-50 in that, almost getting it right there, WWE, but you're also almost getting it catastrophically wrong. You just don't need Reigns to rush back straight into that main event scene. Get the title off the Fiend. The Fiend's turned up on Smackdown. He's just gone, Wyatt has in the Funhouse. Oh, I've lost the title again. That's a shame. Strowman's nowhere to be seen. And also Alexa Bliss is floating around backstage dressed as Abigail or whatever. It's just, they're almost there.
That's probably one of the shining lights of that, isn't it? Because she's going to turn heel and we'll have that program with Nikki Cross that we talked about maybe.
I don't know. I mean, now the title's back on Reigns. Great, fantastic. But, they could have done... Just didn't realise I was passionate about this until you asked, really. But I mean, he lost the title, which he never lost. Get back the title he never lost. I mean, that could be built for a much longer period of time, against a strong Fiend who's never lost, even against a strong Strowman. But sort of 50% there, 50% miles away.
Come on, then, how are we rebooking this?
Oh well, you have to go back a long way to Goldberg. I mean, can't talk about that again. But I think you just have Strowman and Wyatt fighting much earlier, like they did at the beginning of the Payback match. Don't have Strowman doing stupid stuff. No problem. Give it to Wyatt and just hold it off in terms of Reigns coming back. Or have Reigns beat Strowman and hold off Reigns Wyatt. But they've now been in the ring together. Where's Strowman going to go? Where's Wyatt going to go? And although I quite like the fact that Reigns' next match is against his cousin, one of the Usos, also that's clearly not a match that Uso is going to win. So now they've got Reigns with the title. It's a bit, what do we do? Yeah,
I agree. It might be good to see them maybe join forces, wouldn't it?
That would be excellent. That would be excellent. Turn Uso heel. But I think the issue is, and you could see it on SmackDown, they've turned Reigns heel, but he's almost like the heel, the cool heel. What you really need to do is be the annoying heel that Seth Rollins is now, before becoming the cool heel, before becoming the face. But it's like Reigns has gone straight to that cool heel role. But there was no need to do it. Now, I mean, they should have turned him heel when he beat The Undertaker and he came back the night on Raw and said, "This is my yard now." And he couldn't say anything else because he was being booed. There's no fans there now. So there's no, I know you say ratings, but there's no rush to get it through. Anyway, I'm sort of going around in circles.
I think you are a little bit, yeah. But it's 2020 here and now, isn't it? Everything is instant. Right, let's move on to our final segment, shall we? We've got the main event title scene over on Monday Night Raw. So this is for the actual WWE title. So, right, we had Orton and McIntyre at SummerSlam. What match that was, which we'll come on to talk about shortly. That was 20 minutes, 35 seconds. Had a decent amount of time to sort of tell the story, which we know, of course, McIntyre won, and then Orton attacked McIntyre the next night on Raw. So that would have been the 25th of August episode of Raw. And so he then, in theory, has been written off TV. Of course, I'm sure you saw him taken out in the ambulance. Obviously, sad moment.
3 punts to the head or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. Then we had Payback, where we had Keith Lee, who had made his debut on Raw the previous week. And he then fought Orton in that match there. And then we had, fast forward to the latest episode of Raw. That's the 31st of August episode of Raw, where we had Orton effectively end up winning a triple threat to bring us all the way back to him fighting McIntyre, or him being the number one contender.
A Clash of Champions today. That's where we're back are. Yeah.
So we've come full circle here, which is sort of fine because Orton is probably the top guy on Monday Night Raw. He's the most experienced. There's a lot of talk that you read in the dirt sheets about him being a locker room leader, that old catchphrase. He probably should be the guy to go up against McIntyre. I thought they had a decent match at SummerSlam. I'd like to see it again. The problem is almost, not quite totally, but almost buried him by having him lose other matches in between.
Yes, very good point. Very good point. I think you're absolutely on the money in terms of the match at SummerSlam. I feel it didn't quite live up to expectations, but that might be partly because, there is no crowd. And so everything's not quite as explosive as it might be. I thought Randy Orton was very dominant in that match with McIntyre. Up until the point McIntyre puts him in a figure four, Orton was really, really dominating that, which actually is what you need because McIntyre's had no vulnerability really at all during this reign, and you need your babyface champ to have some of that. And you're absolutely right. Randy Orton is a legitimate challenger. All the others, even Ziggler, when he's giving himself different stipulations, you're just not expecting him to win. And it was also interesting in that match that in the end, it was the backslide, wasn't it? So we didn't see an RKO or a Claymore. So they clearly, actually, in terms of a longer term booking, had thought about, okay, how are we going to do this? But to take the second point there, my big concern, until I'd seen Raw this week, my big concern was that, like you say, Orton was not destroyed, but was buried because he loses to McIntyre fairly cleanly. And then he's interrupted by Keith Lee, which we'll talk about as well, I guess, on Raw. Then they have a match at Payback, which Orton also loses to Lee convincingly. And it's right that obviously Lee should win his first match. But a bit like Reigns, what's the rush?
And not against Orton.
No, exactly. And also, you've now got Orton in the main title picture, but he's just lost back-to-back matches. So, I'm not complaining about Lee winning. And once you put him in that position against Orton, Lee has to win that. But you've then got your champ, your number one contender, and your guy who's taken out 6 people over the course of 6 months, suddenly with back-to-back defeats, and it doesn't quite fit. So again, it's that WWE 50-50.
Do you think it's another case of someone that's come up from NXT? Vince has taken one look at him and gone, looked at his size and what he can do for his size, and doesn't really care about what he's done in NXT, but let's book him how I want to book him on Raw because those are the shows that he books. So there's stuff that's going on in NXT that he has no interest in or no in active involvement as to the actual booking.
Well, there was some criticism because Lee had different music and different attire on Raw. Although again, apparently that's Vince. Thinking back to what we were saying earlier, that's Vince. He doesn't have control. He doesn't have the music is owned by someone else, which is why I want different music. I mean, Lee's match at Payback with Orton was really, really good. The sound of the chops on Lee's chest were horrific, and he, won conclusively with that spirit bomb. So I thought the match was good, and he has to win. But you're right. You sort of suddenly Lee is right up there, and it's a bit like the Reigns stuff. It's really, really rushed. And actually, thinking about Keith Lee's trajectory over the last few weeks or month or so, he's been built really nicely. He had that spot at the Rumble with Lesnar. Before that, he had a Survivor Series spot with Reigns. So, they clearly recognize that he's a top tier talent and he's got great potential to be a top tier talent. But then suddenly he's a double champion, beating Cole. So he's the first ever NXT double champion, gives up one title, which he's got to. And then in his first match, he's lost to Karrion Kross. And so, all that build for Lee to be there is gone. And then it's not their fault, but Karrion Kross is injured. So actually now all the plans are different when it could have just stayed on Lee for a bit longer. You then chuck him up to Raw, give him some new music and a sort of strange
dress.
Yeah, dress type attire. There's just a rush that doesn't need to be. What I would say is rather than double down on that, I'll pull back a little bit and actually on Raw, I still think he's been pushed too quickly, given that he was a double champion 6 weeks ago, and now he's lost. But on Raw, he did get he had a fantastic match with Ziggler, who Again, what an underrated guy he is. A fantastic match with Ziggler. And then he looked fantastic in the main event. And Orton actually pinned Rawlins off Lee's dominance. So they've done a good job. You talked about bringing it full circle. They've done a good job of allowing Orton to be back in that main event, even though he's lost those back-to-back matches. It's sort of, it's okay. And they're sort of doing a good job in keeping Lee relevant and strong without having him lose too quickly or end up in a different position. But it's still not quite there. Almost, but not quite.
Yeah. When do you pull the trigger on Keith Lee if you don't do it then? If you're saying he's gonna drop those NXT titles, which I agree was too quick, then when does he come up? I think coming back to Orton and McIntyre though, McIntyre has still been a fantastic champion. He's had that match now with Orton, which has gone some way to kind of say nailing down his legacy as a champion. It looks like they're going to have one more, so I'll look forward to seeing it. Yeah,
I think you're right. They've been kept apart nice. In fact, thinking of Orton and McIntyre, and then Rawlins is just a little bit below them at the moment currently in the scene, but I think it works really, really well. And just thinking back, you said, when does Lee come up? I think we'd have both had him a little bit further, a little bit longer in terms of that reign, and certainly in hindsight with the injury, it's a shame he's come up, but he doesn't have to go straight into the main event picture, does he? We're talking about the Hurt Business. We're talking about Lashley with the title. I'd happily see him fight. Let's rebook on a massive scale. Cruz joins the Hurt Business. Lee comes up. Lee fights Cruz. Lee beats Cruz. Lee goes on to fight Lashley, and then you've got a massive mid-card, two huge guys, legit guys fighting. Whoever wins that, Lee can win and have the title, and then Lashley can go to the main event scene, or some sort of whatever, and with Lashley retaining, Lee takes a sort of sidestep. I think that's the way to do it. If you know obviously much better than I, but if you think about how WWE used to build their stars, it was so much better than this quick short-termism where you're in the main event. Look at the Fiend. They spent ages building him, chucked him in that Hell in a Cell match with Rawlins, and then since then he's just been on the decline because he was rushed so quickly.
The question, I think, just to kind of summarize all of this here, is where do you place your talent coming from NXT as the top guy or the top champion on the main roster? Because if you actually look at the Iron Man match that's happened on NXT last week, you've had 4 previous champions, one of which has been a champion on the main roster in Finn Balor.
Yeah.
And Keith Lee was above all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, Ciampa's been away for a bit. So is being the main champion a ticket straight to the main event on the main event scene on the main roster? Personally, I don't think so. You think about when Owens came up and he kind of took a little bit of time just to build. Ditto Finn Balor. Even Rollins, of course, was in the Shield.
Yeah, and look at McIntyre now. He lost his way a little bit in the middle, but when he came up to Raw, he was with Ziggler to start with. Then they joined up with Strowman, and then he messed around a little bit, but then they turned him around. I think that's a really good question you posed there. I haven't really thought about it. Like what is that NXT title jumping point to? Is it a jumping point to the mid card, or is it, I was the NXT champion, and they're starting to hold it now, aren't they? They're starting to count that as their title reigns and talk about people being triple champ or whatever. Yeah,
especially when you've got like Charlotte flip flopping back, you had Rhea Ripley come up and go back. It's a tricky one because Big E's a former NXT champion, and look where it was. It's tricky, and it really comes down to whether Vince wants to strap the rocket.
And also though, maybe you're trying to think of a definitive answer, but maybe it depends a little bit where the need is. Andrade was a superb champion, absolutely superb, the matches he had. But if there's a need for a Latino style tag team, then that's where he goes, and he does great work there. If Keith Lee comes in and he's main event, fine straight away. Or if Undisputed Era come up, it's going to be hard to see where they put them. So maybe they won't go after titles and they'll just run around like Retribution, kicking the hell out of people. So, yeah, but that's definitely a really great question.
Maybe one for another podcast.
Or someone to tweet at us.
All right. On that note, let's wrap things up, shall we? I think we've been around for long enough today.
Yeah, that's really good. It's probably time to tap out, though.
Wrestling Rebooked at gmail.com if you want to shoot us. Until next time.